Watch this before you break a poor man's heart. The sun beat down on the lavish riverside wedding feast of Chief Adesina's beautiful daughter, Abony. The entire village had gathered in their finest garments to eat roasted meats and dance to the rhythm of heavy wooden drums. But the joyful, loud music stopped abruptly when a poor fisherman named Cato stepped forward. He wore a faded, dusty tunic, holding a small, intricately carved wooden box in his rough, calloused hands. He had come to offer a humble wedding gift to the proud woman he once loved deeply. Instead of accepting the gift gracefully, Abony laughed loudly. She stood before the silent, watching crowd, her royal coral beads gleaming brightly in the afternoon sun, and pointed a manicured finger directly at his chest. "Why are you here?" she mocked, her harsh voice echoing over the quiet courtyard. "You are a man with empty hands and an empty future. Do you honestly think a wealthy royal princess could ever belong to a dirty beggar?" Cato stood absolutely still. The cruel, unforgiving words sliced through his chest, breaking a humble heart that had beaten only for her. He did not yell in anger. He did not curse her name. He simply looked deeply into her eyes with a profound, shattering sorrow. As his heart broke, a sudden violent crack of thunder roared over the perfectly clear blue sky. The gentle river beside them suddenly rippled violently, crashing angrily against the mud banks. Watching the unnatural waves, the village elder whispered, "The river has heard." The heavy, uncomfortable silence in the royal courtyard was only broken by the violent splashing of the suddenly restless river. Cato did not try to defend himself against Abony's cruel, public laughter. His face remained a mask of quiet, unshakable dignity, but his gentle soul was weeping inside. He slowly turned away from the mocking bride and the whispering, pointing guests. He walked directly toward the edge of the rushing, dark water. Without saying a single word to the crowd, he held out his calloused hands and dropped the carved wooden box into the churning, muddy currents. The little box sank instantly, swallowed by the waves. Inside that humble wooden shell was not gold or expensive silver, but a sacred river stone that had been glowing faintly for many long years. It was an ancient, secret treasure, meant only for a pure and loving heart. As the wooden box vanished completely beneath the muddy surface, a strange, terrifying phenomenon occurred. The deep water directly beneath the sinking box began to glow with an intense, piercing blue light. The frightened villagers gasped loudly, stepping quickly back from the wet riverbank in absolute shock. The magical light was beautiful but terrifying, pulsing like a dying heartbeat under the dark waves. Cato walked away, disappearing into the dense, green trees, never looking back at the ruined feast. Behind him, the deep blue glow did not fade away. Instead, the strange glow spreads downstream. By the time the morning sun rose over the quiet village, the joyful memories of the lavish royal wedding had been completely erased by a terrifying new reality. The once mighty river, the absolute lifeblood of the entire kingdom, was rapidly receding. Where deep, fast-flowing water used to run just yesterday, there were now wide, ugly patches of wet mud and exposed, sharp rocks. The local fishermen rushed out to the muddy banks in a state of sheer panic. They cast their wide, woven nets out into the remaining shallow, murky waters, hoping desperately for the best. But every single net was pulled up completely empty. There was not a single catch to feed their hungry families. The water was unnaturally still, shallow, and completely silent. Fear quickly spread through the mud brick houses like a wild, uncontrollable bushfire. Young children gathered near the edge of the shrinking muddy waters, pointing their trembling little fingers at the drying earth. They whispered softly among themselves that the ancient river spirits were deeply and dangerously angry. The older men and women nodded in grim agreement, vividly remembering the terrible thunder from the day before. As the panicked villagers stood arguing loudly about what to do, a collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd. Slowly rising from the murky, shallow depths, a massive dead fish floats to the surface, something never seen before. To truly understand the tragic depth of Cato's broken heart, one had to look back into the village's past. Years earlier, long before she wore heavy royal beads and expensive silk wrappers, young Abony was just a playful, careless girl. During the dangerous season of the great floods, She had foolishly wandered much too close to the angry, swollen riverbanks. The soft, muddy earth suddenly collapsed beneath her small feet, and she was instantly swept away by the raging, violent currents. The grown village men stood frozen in terror on the banks, believing the chief's daughter was already lost to the deadly depths. It was the poor, quiet boy, Cato, who bravely dove into the violent, crushing waters without a single second of hesitation. He fought the vicious, heavy tide, risking his own young life to drag the choking, terrified girl back to the safety of the muddy shore. As they lay coughing and shivering on the wet riverbank, a terrified but deeply grateful Abony had tightly held his shaking, cold hand. Looking into his worried, heroic eyes, she had made a solemn, tearful vow. "When I rise and become a woman of power," she promised softly, "I will never forget you." But time, wealth, and status can easily poison the purest memories. Back in the present day, looking at the dying, shallow river, the painful truth was clear. She has forgotten. Despite the terrifying, unnatural signs happening all around her, Abony stubbornly refused to show any fear or remorse. She sat proudly on the shaded wooden veranda of her father's grand, beautiful compound, casually adjusting her heavy, expensive gold earrings. When her terrified maids rushed in, crying loudly about the rapidly shrinking river and the completely empty fishing nets, she simply rolled her dark eyes in deep, arrogant annoyance. "It is just a normal dry season," Abony insisted loudly, waving her manicured hand dismissively at the crying servants. "You village people are far too superstitious and ignorant. Do you really think the sky cries just because a poor, useless beggar was turned away from my royal feast?" She laughed loudly at the fearful rumors spreading rapidly through the dusty marketplace. Her immense pride wrapped securely around her like a thick, unbreakable iron armor, completely blinding her to the spiritual disaster unfolding right outside her door. She truly believed her royal blood and her new, incredibly wealthy husband made her completely untouchable by the ancient forces of nature. She ordered the nervous servants to prepare another lavish, massive meal, refusing to acknowledge the growing panic in the streets. But nature does not care about human royalty or pretty gold earrings. While Abony feasted, laughed, and drank in her shaded, cool courtyard, the harsh, punishing sun beat down on the surrounding farms. Crops begin wilting. The terrified village could no longer ignore the escalating, deadly crisis. The desperate elders urgently called for Mama Sod, the ancient, blind, and deeply respected river priestess. She was a frail, tiny woman with pure white hair, dressed in a faded indigo cloth, but her unseeing eyes held the terrifying raw power of a brewing thunderstorm. She walked very slowly to the exact center of the dusty village square, leaning heavily on her carved wooden staff. The frantic, shouting villagers fell totally, respectfully silent as she slowly raised her thin, trembling hand. She closed her eyes tightly, listening carefully to a spiritual wind that only she could hear. When she finally spoke, her raspy, deep voice carried a heavy, undeniable truth that chilled everyone to the bone. "The river is not just ordinary water," Mama Sod declared loudly, striking her heavy wooden staff against the dry, cracked earth. "The river is eternally bound to a living, beating heart. It deeply feels what we feel. Break that chosen heart, and you completely break the village's sacred blessing." Abony's father, Chief Adesina, stepped forward quickly, his proud face pale with genuine worry. "Whose heart, Mama? Who holds the ultimate fate of our dying waters?" Mama Sod opened her ancient, sightless eyes and pointed a trembling, bony finger toward the completely empty fishing boats. "She names Cato as River's Chosen." Later that very night, under the thick, protective cover of darkness, Cato walked quietly to the edge of the rapidly dying river. Mama Sod was already waiting patiently for him beside the twisted roots of a dead mahogany tree. The young, heartbroken fisherman knelt respectfully before the old priestess, his broad shoulders heavy with a profound sadness he simply could not shake. "You threw the sacred gift away," Mama Sod whispered softly, her raspy voice full of deep, understanding sorrow. Cato nodded his head slowly, tears welling in his eyes. He finally revealed the incredible secret he had kept hidden his entire, difficult life. When he was just a tiny newborn, a mysterious, glowing covenant stone had been entrusted to him by the ancient river spirit. The sacred stone was a living, breathing bond between the deep water and the village. But its immense magic was not fueled by dark spells or animal sacrifices. Its incredible power was fueled entirely by gratitude, humility, and pure love. "I truly loved her, Mama," Cato said, a single tear finally escaping his eye and falling into the dry dirt. "I kept the stone perfectly safe because my humble heart was full of hope. But when she cruelly mocked me before the entire world, that pure love turned to cold ash. I had absolutely nothing left to power the river's blessing." Mama Saad reached out and placed a comforting warm hand on his chest, feeling the deep, spiritual void inside him. "The stone has gone dark." The devastating consequences of the broken heart spread through the village with ruthless, terrifying speed. What started as a slowly receding river quickly transformed into a deadly, unforgiving famine. The once vibrant bright green maize fields turned into vast expanses of brittle, dead, brown dust. The village livestock, once fat and incredibly healthy, grew weak and painfully thin, collapsing daily in the unforgiving, scorching heat. The deep stone communal wells, which had never failed the people in over 100 years, dried up completely, leaving absolutely nothing but cracked, baked mud at the very bottom. Total panic quickly and violently turned into bitter, undeniable anger. The suffering, thirsty villagers gathered in the dangerously hot marketplace, their faces tight with severe hunger and growing fear. They began pointing angry, accusatory fingers toward the chief's grand, walled compound. They loudly and aggressively blamed Abony's lavish, arrogant wedding and her unnecessarily cruel rejection of the quiet fisherman for bringing a deadly, undeniable curse upon their innocent homes. The fearful whispers of the hungry children had officially become the furious, demanding shouts of desperate, protective parents. Chief Adesina watched the large, angry mob forming right outside his tall, royal gates. He knew with absolute certainty that if he did not act immediately, his starving people would riot, and his prideful daughter would be in grave physical danger. He quickly called for his armed royal guards. The chief summons Cato. Cato stood completely calm and silent in the absolute center of the grand royal throne room. He looked entirely out of place in his worn, dusty clothing, surrounded by the chief's shiny gold ornaments and expensive silk draperies. Chief Adesina sat heavily on his massive carved wooden throne, looking incredibly exhausted, aged, and deeply desperate. "You must fix this terrible disaster, Cato," the chief demanded loudly, his voice a strange, shaking mixture of royal authority and deep, undeniable fear. "Mama Saad says you are the river's chosen. Use your hidden magic. Command the deep waters to return before my innocent people starve to death." Cato did not bow his head. He looked straight at the panicked chief, and then his dark eyes drifted to Abony, who stood defensively in the corner, her arms crossed in stubborn, unyielding pride. He felt absolutely no anger toward her, only a profound, hollow emptiness in his chest. "I have no magic to give, Chief Adesina," Cato replied quietly, his steady voice echoing clearly in the large, tense room. "I was only a humble vessel. The water always responded to the pure love in my spirit. But your arrogant daughter permanently destroyed that." He looked directly into Abony's eyes. "A river cannot flow through a heart that despises it." Before the shocked chief could argue, the bright sky outside darkened violently and unnaturally. A sudden, deafening crack violently shook the very foundation of the palace. Lightning strikes a sacred tree. The terrified villagers rushed frantically to the main village square, staring in absolute horror at the brightly burning remains of the giant, sacred baobab tree. Mama Saad stood calmly near the smoking black branches, her deeply wrinkled face illuminated by the bright, dying flames. Chief Adesina and Abony hurried out of the palace gates, pushing urgently through the panicked, crying crowd to reach the old blind priestess. "The ancient spirits are furiously angry," a terrified villager cried out into the night. "We are all going to perish in the dust." Mama Saad slowly raised her carved staff, demanding immediate silence. The noisy crowd quieted instantly, hanging desperately onto her every single word. She looked directly at the royal family, her sightless eyes burning with an ancient, terrifying knowledge. She was finally ready to reveal a powerful, secret prophecy that had been hidden for many long generations. The wise ancestors warned us of this exact, terrible day, Mama Sod declared loudly, her voice echoing perfectly in the quiet night. They said that when foolish pride openly mocks pure humility, the river will not simply dry up. It will completely sever its sacred bond with the greedy and the arrogant. She paused for a long moment, letting the heavy, terrifying words sink deeply into the minds of the frightened people. When the old, corrupted bond is broken, the river will choose again. Ebony stepped forward, her former, unbreakable confidence finally beginning to crack. Choose who? Ebony asks. While the frightened village panicked endlessly over ancient prophecies and burning, sacred trees, a much darker, strictly human betrayal was hiding quietly in the shadows. Ebony's brand new husband, a very wealthy merchant from a large neighboring city, had certainly not married her out of genuine, pure love. He was a cold, calculating man driven entirely by endless, selfish greed. Long before the lavish, arrogant wedding feast even took place, the wealthy suitor had devised a highly wicked, secret plan to massively increase his own personal fortunes. He had secretly hired corrupt men to quickly build a large, hidden dam far upstream, buried deep in the thick, unreachable bush. He was illegally and quietly diverting a massive, critical portion of the village's life-giving river toward his own private, sprawling commercial farms. When Cato's devastating heartbreak tragically caused the water spirit to withdraw its magical blessing, the wealthy husband's greedy, illegal dam made the natural disaster 10 times worse for the innocent people. His secret, selfish theft was the exact reason the communal wells dried up so incredibly fast. Late that warm evening, Ebony walked quietly toward her husband's private chambers to seek some emotional comfort. As she slowly approached the heavy wooden door, she clearly heard him talking and laughing loudly with his corrupt, paid workers. He was shamelessly bragging about the stolen water. Ebony overhears his confession. The sudden sickening shock of her husband's cruel, arrogant laughter completely shattered Ebony's remaining, fragile pride. She violently pushed open the heavy wooden door, her eyes wide with furious, undeniable disbelief. Her wealthy, handsome suitor froze in his tracks, his corrupt, dirty workers quickly backing away into the dark shadows of the large room. You actually stole our drinking water? Ebony yelled loudly, her voice shaking violently with intense rage and deep heartbreak. My innocent people are literally dying of thirst outside these walls, and you are secretly watering your massive, private farms? Her husband did not look the least bit ashamed. Instead, his handsome face quickly twisted into an ugly, highly arrogant sneer. Do not act so incredibly righteous, my dear, he snapped coldly and dismissively. You gladly married me because I am very rich. And I married you strictly to get unrestricted, easy access to your foolish father's massive lands. There is no real love here at all. It is just simple business. The cruel, honest words hit her like heavy physical blows to the stomach. She ran out of the room, crying, dragging him forcefully into the open courtyard before her shocked father and the remaining royal guards. Screaming loudly, she exposed his terrible, selfish greed to absolutely everyone. The picture-perfect marriage collapses publicly. Out in the dark distance, the river recedes further. The shocking news of the wealthy merchant's sudden arrest brought absolutely no real comfort to the suffering, dying village. The terrible damage was already done. The magical spiritual bond was completely broken, and the physical life-giving water was entirely gone. Inside his small, incredibly dusty round hut, Cato slowly packed his few meager belongings into a woven grass sack. He carefully folded the old, faded cotton tunic he had worn to the disastrous wedding feast. There was absolutely nothing left for him in this cursed, dry place. The proud woman he loved had publicly humiliated him, and the magical river that had guided his entire life was completely dead. It was finally time to find a brand new home far away. As he walked slowly through the quiet, dusty village paths, a few desperate elders tried to block his way, begging him loudly to stay and try to speak to the angry spirits one last time. Cato shook his head very gently, his dark eyes filled with a deep, unmovable, and profound sorrow. I cannot help you any more, Cato said softly to the crying, pleading elders. A man cannot possibly give what he no longer holds inside. Where my heart is not honored, my spirit cannot remain. He stepped quietly past them, walking slowly toward the very outskirts of the town. The riverbed cracks open. The violent, loud cracking of the completely dry riverbed sent the entire thirsty village into a state of absolute, uncontrollable panic. Deep, terrifying fissures opened widely in the baked, dry mud, completely swallowing the last remaining, dirty puddles of drinking water. The scorching, bright yellow sun showed absolutely no mercy to the people below. Inside the small, incredibly hot clay houses, the tragic situation became completely unbearable. Young, innocent children lay weakly on their woven mats, crying very softly from the agonizing, sharp pain of a deep, unquenchable thirst. The desperate farmers stood hopelessly at the edges of their totally ruined fields, watching their entire livelihood turn into useless, blowing brown dust. The essential crops had failed entirely, leaving absolutely nothing but starvation and deep despair. A massive, highly angry crowd gathered outside the tall walls of the chief's compound. They completely bypassed the shouting royal guards and directly surrounded Abony, who was sitting miserably on the dusty ground, her once beautiful royal garments heavily stained with thick dirt. They wept openly, pulling desperately at her clothes. "You caused this terrible curse," an angry, crying mother screamed, holding her weak, dying infant. "Your foolish pride chased away our only blessing. You must quickly bring him back. You must fix what your arrogance broke." The villagers aggressively beg Abony to act. She kneels for the first time. Abony finally knew that an ordinary, simple apology would definitely not save her dying, thirsty people. She absolutely had to seek direct spiritual intervention to fix her massive mistake. Leaving the protective safety of her father's walled compound, she walked entirely alone to the dark edge of the forbidden forest. The massive trees here were twisted, strange, and incredibly ancient, completely blocking out the bright sun and creating a dark, terrifying, shadowy maze. This was the highly dangerous place where Mama Saad communed directly with the powerful ancestors. Abony took a very deep breath and stepped bravely into the thick shadows. The deep forest was an unpredictable, magical place that strongly symbolized both extreme physical danger and undeniable, harsh truth. Sharp thorns painfully tore at her expensive, delicate silk wrapper, and jagged rocks deeply cut her bare, soft feet, but she did not stop walking. She pushed aggressively through the dense, creeping green vines, calling out loudly for the old, blind priestess. Suddenly, the dense trees magically parted, revealing a small, perfectly round clearing. Mama Saad sat perfectly still on a mossy rock, her eyes completely white, lost in a deep, magical trance. The still air around the old priestess grew incredibly, unnaturally cold. Abony tried to step forward, but an invisible, heavy force forcefully pushed her back. A spirit wind circles her. The violently swirling wind completely trapped Abony in the exact center of the dark, magical clearing. An incredibly thick, brightly glowing blue mist slowly rose from the damp, forest soil, twisting and taking the massive, towering shape of the ancient, powerful river spirit. The cold air became extremely heavy with the strong smell of deep, fresh water and very old, potent magic. Abony fell flat to her face, shaking uncontrollably in absolute terror. A booming, echoing voice, sounding exactly like rushing, massive waterfalls, spoke directly into her terrified mind. "You foolishly seek the water's quick return," the massive spirit rumbled loudly. "But pure water cannot possibly wash away a dark, ugly stain on the human soul. You must painfully face your own terrible darkness." The bright blue mist shifted rapidly, creating a perfect, glowing, magical illusion of her lavish wedding day. Abony was forcefully made to stand up and closely watch herself openly sneer at poor Cato. She had to carefully listen to her own cruel, arrogant laughter and see the profound, shattering, innocent pain in the kind fisherman's dark eyes. The crushing, undeniable guilt finally felt like a heavy physical weight resting directly on her chest. "You publicly humiliated pure love before the whole world," the spirit declared loudly. "Pride must be broken as deeply as the heart." Abony slowly returned to the thirsty village completely covered in dark dirt, her highly expensive royal garments torn to literal rags. But there was a completely new, incredibly intense fire of determination in her eyes. She walked directly to the dry village square and fiercely demanded that her father quickly ring the great, heavy gathering bell. Within just a few minutes, the entire thirsty, exhausted, and confused population had gathered closely around her. Cato, who had been forcefully stopped by the desperate royal guards at the village border, stood very quietly at the very back of the massive crowd. Ebony climbed slowly onto the large, flat stepping stone in the absolute center of the dusty square. She looked out sadly at the suffering, thin faces of her dying people and began to weep genuinely. Before the entire shocked village, Ebony loudly and clearly confessed her terrible pride, her foolish, blind arrogance, and her completely unforgivable cruelty toward the good man who had once bravely saved her young life. She reached up and quickly unclasped her heavy, expensive gold necklaces. She took off her royal coral beads. She walked slowly to the edge of the cracked earth and laid her royal jewelry in the completely dry riverbed. Silence. Then thunder. The incredibly low, powerful rumble of dark thunder rolled slowly across the heavy gray sky, but absolutely no rain fell on the village. Ebony remained kneeling humbly in the thick dust by the empty riverbed, her head bowed low in total, absolute submission. The large, silent crowd parted quickly as Mama Sod walked slowly forward, striking her heavy wooden staff sharply against the dry ground. The old blind priestess pointed her highly wrinkled, shaking finger directly at Cato, who stood at the back. "The public confession has been truthfully made," Mama Sod announced loudly, her raspy, commanding voice carrying easily through the incredibly tense air. "The foolish, ugly pride has been fully broken. But the magical covenant stone was always fueled directly by the pure heart of the chosen one. The final, ultimate decision rests entirely with him." All anxious eyes slowly turned to the poor, quiet fisherman. The incredibly difficult final test had officially arrived. Cato stepped forward slowly, looking down sadly at the crying woman who had publicly, ruthlessly shattered his very soul. He clearly remembered her highly mocking, cruel laughter. He must decide whether to truly, completely forgive her from the absolute bottom of his soul. If he refuses, the river dies forever. He closes his eyes. In the quiet darkness behind his closed eyes, Cato carefully searched his deeply wounded, tired soul. The sharp, burning pain of Ebony's cruel, public rejection was still very much there, burning hotly like a fresh, glowing coal. It would have been incredibly, wonderfully easy to just walk away, to let her deeply suffer the terrible consequences of her own terrible, blind arrogance. But Cato clearly heard the weak, heartbreaking cries of the highly thirsty, innocent village children. He physically felt the dry, dying, baked earth directly beneath his highly worn, old sandals. He fully realized that stubbornly holding on to his personal, righteous vengeance would absolutely destroy hundreds of completely innocent lives. He took a very long, incredibly deep breath and slowly released the heavy, bitter anger directly into the blowing wind. Cato firmly chose to genuinely forgive, not specifically for her sake, but for the absolute survival of the entire village. "I truly forgive you, Ebony," Cato said softly but clearly. "I let the deep pain go entirely." The very moment the pure, honest words left his lips, a miraculous, bright light pierced the thick mud at the bottom of the riverbed. The covenant stone glows faintly. The river trembles. Before the magical, life-saving water could fully return to the dry banks, the village had one final, highly important piece of brutal business to settle immediately. The chief's strong royal guards aggressively dragged Ebony's wealthy, highly deceitful husband right into the absolute center of the dusty square. He kicked wildly and shouted loudly, arrogantly demanding to be released instantly, but the furious, betrayed villagers completely surrounded him, cutting off any escape. Chief Adesina stood extremely tall, his powerful royal authority fully and completely restored. He addressed the highly angry, shouting crowd, his deep voice booming with intense, righteous fury. He publicly and thoroughly exposed the greedy, selfish suitor for illegally, secretly diverting the precious river upstream and happily choosing to let the innocent people starve just to massively increase his own personal profits. The villagers roared loudly in absolute, uncontrollable outrage. They definitely did not wait for the chief to pass a formal, lengthy sentence. The highly angry, desperate farmers and fishermen rushed forward violently, aggressively seizing the wicked, crying man and tearing his highly expensive, imported clothes to absolute shreds. The villagers seize his wealth. Dark clouds gather. A brilliant blinding flash of bright silver lightning violently tore across the blackened heavy sky, followed immediately by an earth-shaking, terrifying boom. Suddenly, the dark heavens opened up entirely, and heavy, incredibly glorious rain poured down massively upon the desperately dry, dying village. The joyful people threw their thin arms high into the air, laughing loudly and weeping openly as the beautifully cool water quickly washed over their dusty, tired faces. Deep within the violently cracked earth, the bright blue glow of the magical covenant stone flared incredibly, stunningly bright. With a massive, incredibly loud roaring sound, the beautiful river surged aggressively back to life. A massive, unstoppable wall of fresh, wonderfully clean water rushed forcefully down the empty channel, instantly filling the wide banks, overflowing happily into the completely empty wells, and deeply soaking the dying, brown farmlands. The magical, physical transformation was absolutely immediate and completely breathtaking to witness. As the incredibly deep, fast waters finally calmed into a steady, beautifully peaceful flow, the glowing, sacred covenant stone slowly floated to the bright surface. The stone dissolves into light. The spirit voice whispers, "The heart has been restored."